Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our bite-sized session. We're going to start promptly at 11 o'clock, so it'll be a little bit quiet for the next few minutes, just whilst we let everybody join. Okay, Sam, are you ready?
I am, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's bite-sized session where we're celebrating Autism Acceptance Week. And whilst we know that we don't need a specific week to celebrate autism, we think it's a really wonderful opportunity to shine a light, and particularly in the context of workplace. My name is Helen Ginman. I'm part of Inclusion Gloucestershire, and I run a variety of different projects, health and wellbeing projects for them. And luckily for you, you can't see my face today. My camera is got a bit of a green tinge on it, which can be quite distracting for audience members. So I'm luckily for you, you can't see me. But today I've also got Sammy. Sammy, would you like to introduce yourself?
So I'm Sammy. I'm the autistic project worker, again working on the health and wellbeing projects in Inclusion Gloucestershire, including Your Voice, Self-Advocacy, Youth Forum and Leader. Yeah, I'll hand back to Helen.
Thanks, Sammy. So just a reminder, everybody's in a mute-only mode at the minute. There will be absolutely opportunities for questions, so feel free to get involved either on the chat, or if you later on when we come to questions and you want to, I'm happy to unmute your line if you'd like to ask the question live. And just so you're aware, the session is being recorded today, and we will make that recording accessible shortly after it's been edited. So the Office for National Statistics published data that shows that only 1 in 5 autistic adults are in any kind of employment. And this is despite research continuously showing that the vast majority of autistic people want to be working. And one of the common reasons for the employment gap is typically because of a lack of autism. There's a lack of education around autism. And this is why we're running a variety of events and activities this week. And some of the things that can make it really hard for someone with autism to get into employment can be due to things like the processes and the approaches that are typically taken by an organisation, as well as the working environment. And these issues can make it hard on both the autistic individual, but also on the business, who are sometimes unsure of what they can do, what they could do, and what they should do.
So, the strengths of the autistic people in the workplace can outweigh the perceived challenges that are faced by the businesses. For example, autistic people have an excellent eye for detail, preferring to focus on their attention on one thing at a time, opposed to a multitasking approach, which can be difficult for an autistic person. When there is a very strong focus on the small details, it can lead to a consistently high standard of work that is provided for the customer service, users, colleagues, and the business itself. Sometimes attention to detail can allow us, as an autistic person, to spot things that others may have missed. And the collaboration between neurotypical employees and autistic employees is mutually beneficial and can help achieve better outcomes for the company. Often, autistic people have a very clear moral code, with a really deep sense of loyalty and a strong sense of what's right and wrong. That's not to say that neurotypicals don't, of course you do, but we have a bit more of a black and white thinking, and when we think something's right and wrong, that's how it normally is, and that we're less likely to see the grey, nuanced approaches. These values are often so needed in organisations where there is lots of interactions with colleagues, different dynamics, personalities, hierarchies, and organisational structures. One of the ways in which we can support autistic employees in the workplace is being curious and learning about autism and autistic people. Autistic people are the experts in what it is like to live in a neurotypical world. Neurotypical people can be allies, but they don't have the same experience and don't experience the world in the same way. So just provoke a few thoughts. What did you learn about autistic people growing up, or in the wider media? Do you still hold on to those thoughts? Do you think of something like Rain Man? Or what stereotypes do you believe in? Being autistic means that you see, hear, and feel the world of work differently to others. No two autistic people will feel this in exactly the same way. Whilst there can be struggles with a variety of things, there's also lots of positives and strengths. And there can be co-occurring conditions such as ADHD. And men and women can often have different experiences, which affects how they view themselves and how they've been treated at school or in previous workplaces. Women were more likely to have been diagnosed in adulthood and may have been incorrectly labelled with having a mental health condition. Having to mask all day at work can be very draining and can lead to burnout. It's vital that workplaces challenge that stigma, and challenge any stigma that autistic people face. So, how can we support autistic employees?
We all know that communication is really important, and often when we communicate, we're conscious of the message we want to get across. We're conscious of how we want that particular message to be interpreted, and we purposely choose the words and the language that we feel will best do that. But in fact, when we're thinking about supporting autistic employees, it's sometimes about simplifying that language. And typically in places like corporate sectors, there's often a lot of particular language that gets used more often. But using less words, being a little bit more specific, can be really, really valuable. And we don't always get it right when we know that, but being prepared and aware of that we don't always get it right is really important, and that it doesn't make you a bad person. It's absolutely a learning curve. And as we said earlier, no two autistic people experience the same. So it's really important to develop that relationship with the person so you can understand and find out the best way to support them. And Sammy and I work together to do exactly that. You know, each week we have a 30-minute conversation where we sit down, we talk about the week, we review and discuss ongoing and new tasks, and we think about what the priority of those tasks are in reflection of other activities and work that Sammy's doing. And this regular meeting for just 30 minutes is enough of an opportunity to develop a more cohesive approach to communication that works, an opportunity for me to learn the different ways in which I can support and communicate with Sammy, and provide that necessary support to enable her to be successful in her role.
Thank you, Helen. The working environment can sometimes be a struggle with multiple conversations happening, especially if it's an open plan office, phones ringing throughout the day, different smells, people going and having their lunch, interruptions, the lighting, all of these things can be sensory overload. But it's not always possible to change the environment. But one of the ways that helps is having flexibility in where you work. Having a quiet space that allows autistic people to regulate their sensory input and not become overwhelmed. Those are important measures that can help being overwhelmed, because being overwhelmed can lead to a significant mental health crisis. As with anybody, of course, there are pressures outside work that affect how you manage. How much you are able to recuperate in the evenings often affects how much you can do at work. There are many things that affect people each day as they get ready for work, which means that they have an elevated stress level before even getting to the office. For autistic people, there can be considerations such as routines being disturbed, factoring in how we might need to travel to the workplace. For instance, I use a bus to get to work, but I have to travel at set times, as the bus is going when children are going to school can cause sensory overload. The buses are too loud and too noisy. I also have had a bad experience on the bus routes, which means I avoid it. Through a combination of those two things, it can take me over 2 hours to travel to work, which is only actually about 15 miles away from where I live. These are some of the factors that can influence and affect how an employee can get to the working environment. This can often mean the working day has to be extended, combined with the continuous sensory challenges, and contribute to feeling very tired and needing to spend much of the evening recovering. It is normal for neurodiverse people to mask, which is behaving or acting out what is often learned or observe social behaviours that are deemed more socially acceptable to a neurotypical person. A neurodiverse person can often have experienced trauma and judgment, and masking helps them feel like they fit in. In the workplace, you need to act professionally. However, masking is not just necessarily acting professionally. Within the workplace, establishing good relationships, as Helen said earlier, that are based on sharing knowledge, understanding and creating that safe environment can help a neurodiverse person unmask. Creating that culture creates that space for people to unmask, so that to the extent that they feel comfortable.
Now, supporting autistic people absolutely lies in how employers and employees of that organisation model acceptance and inclusion. And this is at every level of the business and every person employed. And of course, you can do that in lots of different ways, from education and awareness sessions, having champions in place, amending policies and processes, and role modelling behaviours, particularly in things like communication. Sammy, what are some of the tips and approaches you think are important?
I mean, I think one of the easiest ways, as we've said, and we keep saying, is having that conversation. It's easy to assume. I think we've all grown up with Rayman and different representations of what it is to be autistic. And actually sitting down and talking about what an autistic person might find helpful, and that how that person might work in the workplace and feel most valued is really important. So Helen, when you first joined, we sat down and we talked about the different ways in which I can be affected by the working environment. And after that initial conversation wasn't the only one. We carry on having conversations about the reasonable adjustments I need, and how to create that space where we can talk openly about the disability and neurodiversity. So just to summarize, every autistic person is an individual with unique strengths and unique struggles. One person might struggle with oversensitivity to certain things, whilst others may be even undersensitive to it. We can remove and reduce things that people struggle with by providing reasonable adjustments and a culture of acceptance. If you do this, your autistic employee will be able to do incredibly well, and they'll be able. Without it, though, they may not be able to perform to the best of their ability.
I'm just going to leave this here as a lasting thought, really. When we were putting this together and thinking about Autism Acceptance Week, we wanted to think about what it might be like to be in an environment that's particularly overwhelming on our sensory requirements. And I was thinking about, how would it be for you to work in a sensory environment that was absolutely hell for you every single day? Imagine your desk is in the middle of a shopping centre, perhaps on Christmas Eve. There's Christmas music playing, children are overexcited, they're screaming, they're crying. There's lots of people, there's lots of strong smells, perhaps there's carol singers, and seemingly everybody else hasn't got a problem with it. They just get on with their work fine in the middle of this crazy melee of shopping centre. And sometimes people are joining in with the carol singing, and there's lots of excitement. You can't move your desk because you have to fit in with everybody else. How long would you last? And perhaps, being in the shopping centre on Christmas Eve is something that you particularly like. But I'm sure, we all have those different things that we have to think about, and creating those working environments that help us to concentrate and help us to focus. And for autistic people, some of those elements are particularly more important than others. So that brings our presentation to a conclusion today, and we would really like to open up the floor to any questions. So I'm just going to stop sharing and hopefully come back. I will start my video in the hope that it doesn't go green, but if it does go green, then I will switch it back off again. But has anyone got any questions or any thoughts? And happy for you to unmute or come onto the chat. always the worrying thing when it's very quiet. I'll just wait a few minutes just in case there are any on chat. Even if you just want to be unmuted to say anything. Oh, thank you for that comment. So the comment on the chat was that was fabulous and really insightful. Thank you, Sammy, for sharing so much information. Thank you for sharing that. I'll just give it one more minute in case of any questions. It's been really helpful presentations. Thank you, Sammy. I've been diagnosed as being autistic and ADHD. I'm a senior manager and struggle to let people know I'm autistic. Any tips on letting people know in a safe manner?
I think that can be a very difficult issue, and especially if you've already been working at your workplace before before you've got your diagnosis. I think, like I say, I think it's about approaching conversations in a way that's open and comfortable to you. You don't have to disclose it, of course, but if you need those reasonable adjustments, I think you possibly need to find your line manager or somebody that you can trust and be open with. Yes, I think Helen.
I was going to say, you know, when I first joined Inclusion Gloucestershire and you and I started working together, actually it's taken a little while, hasn't it, for me to learn more and more about, you know, what you experience in the workplace. And you don't necessarily do that on the first conversation. So sometimes it's about disclosing something that you feel comfortable with to a point, and, you know, and working alongside that person so that they're able to experience those things. And, you know, and I don't always get it right, do I? Ultimately, but I think that's really important to that relationship, and that sort of safety is that acknowledgement that in times as a manager, you know, perhaps, you know, you don't always get it right, and you're continuously learning, and perhaps that contributes to that safe environment.
And I think it really does. And I think even if it's a small bit of your autism or your ADHD that you unmask to an extent, no, Helen doesn't always get it right, but she's always attempting to get it right. We'll quite often try something, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And it's about that openness. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Excellent. So I'm going to ask Sally to unmute, just because she's mentioned on the chat something. So Sally, I've just done that.
I just wanted to say thank you, and Sammy, how nice it is to have a personal perspective on this, because we can undergo so many training sessions, but actually when you hear directly from a person, it makes it so much more valid for me. So thank you for that. I do work with autistic people. I have worked with autistic people, but I learn something new every day. I do not have the answers, and it's really good to have the access to things like this. Thank you.
I think that having an actual autistic voice is really important, which is why I encourage people to speak up, because, as I said, neurotypicals may be allies and very strong allies, but you know, there may not be, as you say, and I'm learning every day as well. You know, I learn to fit into the neurotypical world a bit more, or adapt the neurotypical world so that I can understand it. So I think it's a mutual learning process as well.
Thank you, Sally, for your comments. Some more on the chat. So thank you. It was helpful to understand how masking is in more detail. Thanks also for making me think more widely about how we are inclusive in the workplace, such as the recommendations to do something and not just chat. No questions, but thank you for the presentation. My manager will watch this later. I'm 44, newly diagnosed, and learn how to cope better. I have a lovely team here where I work, and they are really keen to help. I'm just going to switch my camera off because it's flashing. I'm joining a little late. Will you be sharing the slides yet? And we'll have a recording as well, which will make accessible, Rachel, so you'll be able to get that. And last chat on there was no questions from me, but thank you for sharing your experience. My daughter has no formal diagnosis, but has traits. There is a question coming. It's just being typed at the minute. So we'll just wait a little minute for that to come through. If anybody wants to say anything, and just let me know that you want to be unmuted. I've got a specific setting on and I can't quite work out how to do that. So the question that's come through, Sammy, is my daughter, 17 years old, has no formal diagnosis, but has traits. I question if I should get a diagnosis.
I think a diagnosis means different things to a lot of people. So part of what we do at Your Voice is we run a neurodiverse speak up group. We've talked about the value of diagnosis and why people go for diagnoses. Some people do it to access support and health and social care, and that need to do that. But mostly a lot of people do it to give themselves a sense of identity and to understand their own lives in the context of being autistic. And that's incredibly valuable. I know a number of us have spoken about almost having that eureka moment of, oh, that's why I behave the way I do. That's why the world isn't built for me. And that sense of self-identity is really important to people, and self-value. You know, diagnoses are not for everybody, but they can allow you to get reasonable adjustments, not just in the workplace, but in health and social care and in a number of places. And yeah, there's an emotional, like I say, self-worth maybe that is attached to understanding who you are and why you, and indeed the world around you, if that makes sense. I don't know, you know, whether your daughter feels that she wants a diagnosis. I don't know whether it's something that would make a difference for her, but that's just a number of reasons why people do get a diagnosis.
Thank you, Sammy. And the last comment there is thank you for this training. It's helpful, particularly about making reasonable adjustments. So we hope you found today's session and a little bite-sized session quite useful. Over the next couple of days, we've got a couple of different presentations coming out, pre-recorded ones. So Sammy's done a couple of conversations with some people talking about being oversensitive and undersensitive in different sensory environments and how that can impact autistic people. And you've also done one, Sammy, on parenthood as well, being an autistic mum to autistic children. So we will absolutely share those out in the next few days, and we'll get those shared out more publicly. If you've got any more questions that you want to send us, or you're not sure that you don't want to do it particularly in this environment, then feel free to get in contact with us. I've just put our website on there. You can submit some things to us, but we've also got our email address. So any other questions you've got, please feel free to get involved, get in contact with us. Sammy's more than happy to help and support and answer questions. The more we can do, the better change there'll be. So thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy day to attend today. We really, really appreciate it, and I hope you have a good rest of the day.